picture this. You wake up before dawn in a shelter made of hide and bone, and the air burns your lungs before you even sit up. Your breath freezes into a fine white mist above your face. Outside, the wind has been screaming across open tundra for 3 days straight, showing no sign of stopping. There is no fire left, only embers, and if you cannot get them breathing again before dark, your children will not survive the night. You have no metal, no matches, no walls of brick, just stone, sinew, bone, and whatever the frozen ground is willing to give up. This is Ice Age Europe, roughly 20,000 years ago, at the coldest point of the last glacial maximum, and you are one of a few thousand humans trying to stay alive on an entire continent of ice. So here is the question worth asking. How did a hairless, clawless primate, a species built for the warm plains of Africa, survive one of the harshest climates the planet has ever produced for tens of thousands of years, without a single power grid, a single greenhouse, or a single heated room? The answer is not brute toughness. It is a set of inventions, decisions, and social bonds so effective that some of them are still, in modified form, keeping people alive in the Arctic today. The first piece of the puzzle did not come from a cave painting or a spear point. It came from lice. In 2011, researchers at the University of Florida sequenced the DNA of human body lice, the kind that live in clothing rather than hair, and compared it to head lice to see when the two groups genetically split apart. Because body lice can only survive on people who are already wearing clothes that split marks, almost like a biological clock, the moment clothing entered human life. Their calculation put the invention of clothing at roughly 170,000 years ago, tens of thousands of years before humans pushed north into colder latitudes. In other words, humans did not stumble into the cold and improvise. They built the technology to survive it first, then went looking for the cold on purpose. But loose animal hide draped over the shoulders will not stop a wind chill of -40. It needed to be fitted, layered, and sealed at the seams, and that required a tool most people never think of as a survival technology: the needle. Archaeologists working in Siberia's Denisova cave uncovered a bone needle, carved from a bird bone and complete with a threaded eye, dated to around 50,000 years old. A separate needle-like bone tool from Sibadu Cave in South Africa pushes the origins of sewing back even further, to roughly 61,000 years ago, long before humans set foot on the frozen ground of Ice Age Europe. These were not decorative objects. A sewn, fitted garment traps a layer of warm air against the skin the way a modern parka does, and that difference, airtight seams versus a draped hide, can be the difference between a functioning hunting party and a group too cold to leave shelter. Ask yourself this: if clothing alone solved the cold, why did entire human populations still need architecture? Because a hearth deserves walls, and on the open tundra of Eastern Europe, there were none. No forests, no timber, nothing to build with, except the bones of the animals that had already died there. At the site of Mezhirish in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered circular dwellings built almost entirely from mammoth bones, skulls, and jawbones, stacked to form a foundation, tusks arched upward to frame a doorway, the whole structure likely covered in hide for insulation. A 2025 radiocarbon study of small mammal remains found in the same layers, published through Universiteit Leiden, dated one of these structures to the harshest phase of the last ice age and suggested it may have been used, on and off, for as long as 429 years. This was not a one-season shelter. It was closer to a piece of inherited infrastructure maintained across generations at the coldest moment human beings have ever tried to survive. Here is where the story takes its first real turn, because clothing and shelter cannot be the whole answer. Neanderthals had both, and arguably had them first. They were shorter, more muscular, barrel-chested, and physiologically better built to conserve heat than modern humans were, and they had already survived multiple earlier ice ages before Homo sapiens ever set foot in Europe. They made their own tailored clothing, built their own hearths, and hunted megafauna with well-crafted stone tools. If physical toughness and cold-weather technology were the deciding factors in this story, Neanderthals should have been the ones left standing at the end of it. Instead, they vanished, while a comparatively fragile, sunburn-prone newcomer species thrived on the exact same continent, in the exact same climate. So what, exactly, did modern humans have that their tougher, better adapted cousins did not? A study published in 2026 in Quaternary Science Reviews offers the clearest explanation yet, and it has almost nothing to do with muscle or fur. Researchers built habitat and connectivity models, borrowing methods from conservation biology used to track endangered animal populations, and applied them to both species across Europe during a 60,000 to 35,000 year window of extreme climate swings. What they found was that Homo sapiens groups were linked into wide, overlapping social networks that stretched across huge distances, allowing bands to exchange mates, share news of migrating herds, and take in neighbors during a bad season. Neanderthal networks, by comparison, were thinner and more regionally isolated, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. When the climate lurched, and it lurched constantly during this period, isolated groups had nowhere to turn. Connected ones had a safety net. So the deciding technology of the Ice Age may not have been the needle or the mammoth bone hut at all. It may have been something closer to friendship, formalized into ritual and obligation. And nowhere is that clearer than at Zaheer, a burial site in Russia dated to roughly 34,000 years ago. Archaeologists there found an adult male and 2 children buried head to head, their bodies covered in thousands of mammoth ivory beads. Experimental replication shows each bead took roughly an hour to carve by hand, meaning the adult's burial outfit alone represented upward of 3,000 hours of labor, and the children's graves considerably more. Think about what that means for a group living at the edge of starvation, in one of the coldest environments humans have ever inhabited. They spent thousands of hours of collective labor, not on hunting, not on shelter, but on ornamenting the dead. That looks, at first glance, like waste. It is closer to the opposite. Genetic analysis of the Zaheer remains found. The buried individuals were surprisingly unrelated to one another, suggesting this was a community actively managing mating networks across distant, cooperating groups, almost certainly to avoid inbreeding in a thin, scattered population. The beads were not decoration. They were the visible residue of alliances, of trade routes, of promises kept between bands who might never meet the exact people they were sharing resources with, only their reputation. Put those pieces together, and the Ice Age survival story stops looking like a checklist of gadgets and starts looking like a system. Clothing kept individual bodies alive. Needles made that clothing efficient enough to matter. Mammoth bone architecture gave families a fixed point to return to, generation after generation. And underneath all of it, an invisible lattice of social obligation, sealed with beads, ivory, and shared meals, made sure that no single band had to survive entirely alone. Take away any one layer, and the others start to fail. Neanderthals prove that even with the first 3, without the 4th, an entire population can quietly disappear. So return to that person waking up in the hide shelter, breathing life back into a dying fire before dawn, with the wind still screaming outside, and the nearest help a 2-day walk away. They survived that morning, not only because of the coat on their back or the bones stacked over their head, but because somewhere across the tundra, other bands are holding up their end of a bargain none of them ever wrote down. No treaty, no currency, no law. Just beads, and trust, and the memory of who helped whom the last time the herds disappeared. The Ice Age did not simply spare the strong. It tested how well humans could depend on each other when the environment gave them every reason not to. And that, more than any needle, any hearth, or any wall of mammoth bone pulled from the frozen ground, may be the real reason our species is still here to ask the question at all. The cold did not simply spare the strong. It spared the connected.